Okay, thank you very much. First of all, can you hear me all right? Okay, beautiful. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for hosting me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share some work with you today. I would like to talk about the collaborative project together with Mario Molina. It's been in the works for about a year now, and the project is at the moment where we have finished all of our data collection, we have analyzed the data, and we started constructing a narrative that I think makes sense. So let's see if I can make a case that our findings are interesting and they're actually pushing forward research on inequality by bringing in political ideology into micro-level decision-making in organizational contexts. So this is the first time that I talk about this work at this stage. Any questions, comments, suggestions are more than welcome. And please do stop me as I talk, because I can't see everyone and police the room. Please interrupt if there is a clarifying question. I'm happy to stop and address that. So let me start with a picture of unequal outcomes. These are outcomes that we all observe, even if you're inaccurate about estimating its size. And we are sometimes puzzled by it, and usually consciously or unconsciously theorize the reasons behind what we see. So prior research discusses how people think about the sources of inequality. And in this regard, three main ideas prevail. So some people focus on luck and believe that those with better outcomes ended up there due to fate or fortune. While certainly one of the explanations, through this talk, I will focus on the two alternatives. So let me turn to the second one. Some other people see the world as a reflection of individual actions. These are choices that people make to achieve their goals. While maybe some have elevators at their disposal or simply go find them, achieving one's goal is truly dependent on one's own effort, like climbing the stairs as this man is doing in this picture. So those who end up at the top are the people who had never given up heading there. And this has a very, very nice ring to it, and it is surrounded by cultural tropes and reinforced in mainstream media. In the US context, there is a phrase for it, the American dream. And this is the image of social mobility being available to everyone who reaches out for it. So that's the second explanation for unequal outcomes. An alternative view, which is a bit more nuanced and it's a little bit harder to eloquently frame it in children's stories, is that of unequal opportunity. And I think it's very important that the contribution of effort, as pictured here, is clearly recognized. So here are two teams, and they will participate in, let's say, a fair competition, in the sense that they are both going to be participating in the same race, they are starting from the same line, but it's very clear that one of these teams is better equipped in terms of resources to win this competition. So today's story is going to be about the contrast between these two worldviews and their potential implications of how resources are allocated within organizations. So let me show you my last motivational image. And this is a scene from the TV series Mad Men, which you may or may not be familiar with. It is set in the 1960s, and it shows in a million different ways the exclusion of women to make a career in advertising. Importantly, it highlights the segregated nature of roles in the workplace. So women are secretaries, they are not assistants, and this limits their ability to showcase their talent and skill. This has also been similar in news editing, where women mostly worked in the mailroom, and nobody from the mailroom ever had become an editor. So in this context, examining who achieves a position of power or garners success and recognition is not solely the function of effort or hard work, but certainly the structural conditions that select some individuals who receive opportunities, and through hard work, they can distinguish themselves using those opportunities, while others don't have these opportunities at their disposal. So what are the sources of unequal outcomes in organizations? So let me start with modern organizations' constant battle against employees' arbitrary unequal compensation. And this is really a quest for legitimacy. So organizations want to ensure that employees are motivated to keep working for outcomes that are both beneficial for the company as well as beneficial for their own advancement. So organizations, for this reason, use market-driven employment strategies which allocate rewards on the basis of individual merit. So in particular, some scholars in human resource management have long supported the use of pay-for-performance practices, which establish unequal pay structures for unequal contributions within an organization. So this merit-based approach is there to create pay dispersion among employees, and it mainly consists of formal and informal evaluations that measure individual inputs and determine major career outcomes of employees, such as salary increases, bonuses, promotions, and training opportunities. So that's kind of the first strand of literature that speaks to unequal outcomes. So now, research in the tradition of expectation states theory and status characteristics theory has established that the distribution of ascriptive characteristics like age, gender, race, ethnicity determine the observable power and prestige order among social groups. So this is not new. These status hierarchies are rooted in interpersonal hierarchies in shared cultural beliefs that organize interactions with one another and also allocate societal and material rewards. And here the emphasis is on material in this case. So these play a significant role in creating and maintaining durable patterns of inequality, even in advanced industrialized societies with ostensibly meritocratic institutions like the workplace. So these status beliefs are widely shared, cultural stereotypes that involve specific evaluative components about individuals in categorical groups. And a key mechanism behind these stereotypical representations is that they create performance expectations that benefit some individuals in one category, so for example, white people and men, over others in a different category, for example, non-whites or female. Importantly, these expectations comprise multiple cognitive dimensions that relate performance to differential competence and worthiness across categorical distinction. And they do have a chance to create and reinforce inequalities in work-based outcomes, because some social categories are more often associated with beneficial expectations, such as being more skillful, exerting more effort, or being more talented or on task. So let me be a little bit more specific. Like, against this backdrop, it is important to recognize that compensations are often decided by managers or supervisors use some sort of a device to measure contributions. And these are usually something like performance evaluations that they rely on to choose how to allocate rewards to employees. So even when individual performance can be observed and measured, scholars have argued that merit-based strategies may not achieve the outcomes they were created for, because employers are subject to biases determining the distribution of rewards. So these researchers call attention to discriminatory practices on the basis of ascriptive characteristics that do override the goals of these merit-based systems. So based on this literature, inequality is not only linked to actual performance, primarily occurring due to cognitive biases such as prejudice or stereotypes or other cultural constructs, but also can enter the evaluative process at different stages. So, for example, it's possible that two individuals with similar performance receive different evaluations because of their race or gender, But it's also possible that people with different performance evaluations don't get different compensations that would reflect these different evaluations because of those cultural stereotypes in play. So far, so good. This scholarship that I just walked you through is kind of mainstream. This has been the focus of research on inequality in organizations for quite some time. But we are unaware of previous studies focusing on the influence of opportunity beliefs on reward allocations in the workplace. So the lack of research on this topic, we argue, is quite surprising because there is an ample amount of research with lots of solidified findings that support the link between how individuals perceive the availability of opportunity and individuals' tolerance toward unequal outcomes. So, for example, previous research argues that Americans display little concern about high levels of economic inequality, at least partly because they endorse these strong meritocratic principles, these ideals, and believe that opportunity is actually evenly distributed, and that the American dream simply rewards hard work and deferred gratification. Researchers also demonstrate that perceptions of social mobility shape the acceptance of economic inequality, such that those who believe there is high levels of mobility, they are willingly accepting high levels of inequality, and the reverse, those who believe that there are low levels of mobility, they reject higher levels of inequality. So these findings do suggest Americans would become less tolerant of these larger disparities as a function of how they view the opportunity structure in play. So combined, these results show that the perceptions of these opportunities available to get ahead are crucial in determining these outcomes. So this research is rooted in societal inequality, kind of like looking at the society writ large or looking at income writ large. But we think that it stands to reason that these perceptions might also shape inequalities in the workplace. So should decision makers have a particular view about the allocation of opportunities within their organization, it might shape how they evaluate employees' performance. So this is a move that we are making in this paper. So the problem is that in the real world, just looking at observational data, the impact of cultural stereotypes and perceptions of the availability of opportunities is quite challenging. And to our knowledge, it hasn't been interrogated in the literature. And we believe that simply because a lot of this work had been focusing on cultural stereotypes in the workplace and linking that to inequality. So let's say that unequal outcomes are accepted or even endorsed or observed. This could, of course, be a result of differential performance. So this would be like, the first strand of literature. This could also be a function of stereotypes. So let's say we observe inequality and maybe the two people whom we are comparing is a Black and a white worker. The Black worker is making less. It could equally be just a result of cultural stereotypes. But third, it's also possible that these inequalities are a true reflection of choice. And this is how people who were inducing these inequalities were making those decisions that led to them. So if this is how they perceive their organization, this could also induce or enlarge inequalities that otherwise would not be there. So for us, in order to assess the impact of these factors, we constructed an experiment that mimics closely a common situation in modern organizations. And that is allocating bonuses to employees who typically work in teams. So given that our work is situated in the US and the strong meritocratic norms surrounding compensation in organizations, we consider a set of scenarios where performance differences are unclear. And this is very intentional on our part because we do believe that if performance differences were clear, then it would be these meritocratic ideals that would drive compensation, the distribution of compensation. So we think that this approach is both theoretically and empirically productive, and also realistic. So aside from professional sports, there are only a very few settings where individualized performance metrics are both available and quite accurately reflective of actual performance. What we do have is evaluations produced by managers that could be highly subjective. This is the first part. The second part is that teamwork is simply ubiquitous in this day and age in organizations, especially in knowledge work, R&D, science, consulting, the list goes on. So in many of these settings, the accurate measure of individual contributions to collective outcomes is actually a tall order. So in some, we believe that these settings exist in the real world. They are quite widespread. And I could ask around even in the rooms, like, have you ever put an assignment that relied on a group project in a classroom? And then you receive these group projects, and then we're trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I assign credit to these individual students? So this is even common in our own line of work. So now, turning to how productive our approach may be, we are going to focus on racial cues about workers, which we experimentally manipulate, and do so independently to how opportunities to receive challenging tasks are allocated. So we think that choosing race is meaningful in this context, given prior work that showcases that stereotypes are specific about Blacks in the US in the workplace context, that associate this group with laziness or lack of competence or avoidance of hard work. And furthermore, we are going to ensure to observe both ideologically liberals and conservatives, whom we know have different predispositions about how they view the world, like how it functions, to what extent choice determines outcomes as versus unequal opportunities. So more specifically, liberals tend to see the world as less just and be more sensitive to structurally induced inequalities, which drives them to use an equality principle in a lot of cases when they are assessing fairness, which does make sense because if one views unequal outcomes as arbitrary, just a result of starting conditions, an equal distribution would be fair. Conservatives, on the other hand, view the world as just, and outcomes here are really driven by a reflection of individual choice. Any questions so far? I think we are all good. Okay, so let me walk you through the flow of the experiment, and then I will unpack some of the steps that are important for understanding what's going on with our data. So participants, when they arrive to the experiment, they receive information about the tasks that two workers did as a team. So two workers are working as a team. More specifically, these workers were given a series of matrix pairs that showed up on their screen, and they needed to find the second smallest number in each of these matrices and add them up and enter the result in a box. They had to do all of this under time pressure, and if they failed to provide an answer, they were in the allotted time, they simply were advanced to the next tasks. Tasks differed by how challenging they were, which we tweaked by giving differently sized matrices. So sometimes workers saw a 3x3, other times they saw a 5x5, and clearly finding the number, adding it up under time pressure, the 5x5 is just simply more challenging, more difficult. So the participants who come into the experiment, they receive description of what these workers were working on, and they also get a chance to practice these tasks. So they can do an easy task, they can do a hard task, We don't tell them whether they did them correctly, but they are in the exact same decision-making scenario. So then participants are told about the compensation, like how the teams were compensated. And they learn that each correctly done task earned workers 1 or 2 points, and incorrect answers earned them 0 points. More challenging tasks earned more points. So when someone did a more challenging task right, they got 2 points. An easy task resulted in 1 point. And both of the workers were completing 10 tasks. At the end, when they were done with all of their 10 tasks each, we added up all of the points and we converted the sum of these points to real world money. We halved this, so we distributed this outcome equally. So again, external validity, like our view is that the team is working, like everyone is getting their salary, but then there might be a potential for a bonus. And this is what our participants will be deciding on. So after they read about this, they do a set of comprehension check questions just to make sure that they understood team structure and they understood kind of like how the points worked and how the teams were compensated. So then participants receive additional information about the workers and how tasks have been allocated to them. So this is the part that's highlighted in red in the slide, and this is where randomization occurs. I will unpack this in a second. So having received this additional information, participants answer another set of comprehension check questions. So these are concerning their understanding about the allocation of tasks to workers and some additional information we gave them about workers. So finally, participants make their decision in something that is called a disinterested dictator game. More on this in a second as well. They answer follow-up questions about the workers and the allocation mechanism that we used. They express their opinion on a variety of different matters on inequality, race, and redistribution, and they give demographic data. So this is the structure of the experiment. So far, so good. Any questions about our flow? None. Okay, cool. So here, I summarize some of what I've already said, like how the points worked. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the disinterested dictator game, which again, we believe in is an externally valid to this common situation organizations where managers ought to decide, say, year-end bonuses, compensation for the members of teams, but these bonuses are dispersed individually. Again, often the only input is the team outcome. So the manager sees how well the team did, whether they met the deadline, like the quality of the product that they produced, but not necessarily exactly who did what and like how those individuals have performed. In the disinterested dictator game, participants also have a fixed amount of resources that they have to allocate to one of the two workers, and different to the dictator game, they don't keep anything. So this is important that they actually don't have a stake in the allocation that they are making, nor do they have any sort of intuition that they would be interacting later with any of these workers. So we try to minimize any sort of self-interest, like a concern of self-interest in this decision-making situation. To what extent this is externally valid, we could go back and forth. To what extent like managers are expecting the kickback from a particular worker day bonus. But setting that aside, we believe that these two are kind of parallel in the real world and in the experiment that we are constructing. So what do we tell participants about the workers? That was another thing that I mentioned, like, okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this. And what they see is actually a table, like this is a screenshot from the Qualtrics survey where they were doing this study. So after reading a wall of text, we give them a table that summarizes the information that we already had given to them verbally. And in this table, we show a number of things. We give them some demographic information about the workers. We give them the number of challenging tasks that they received out of 10, the number of points that they have earned on a single selected task, like one task out of the 10, and some additional information on workers' presence and approval rating on mTurk. This was the platform that we still did the experiment. Again, I'm going to return to this later. So our experimental manipulations are highlighted in red. Participants either see a race homogeneous team, which is the one pictured here, where both workers are white, or they see a race heterogeneous team. The one of the workers is white and the other one is black. The additional demographic characteristics, gender, age, and education, are completely randomly assigned. So if you're familiar with conjoint experiments, it looks like a conjoint experiment. So this is what they are seeing. Each of these different demographic characteristics had two potential values. They're completely randomly assigned. So the consequence is that on average, worker A and worker B are exactly the same with regards to all of these other characteristics. So race is fixed, everything else varies. And we constructed the values for these other characteristics to be, for example, the age range is close, or education, college and some college, it's kind of similar. So we tried to create a situation that is both realistic for the mTurk population, but also these workers are not truly different in terms of demographics. So last but not least, participants also receive this performance metric that on a single task, both of these workers earned 1 point. This information is fixed across all of the experimental conditions, and it serves two purposes. First, we do give some performance-related information, which would be weird if we didn't do so. But we also do tell participants that workers tended to do well on easy tasks in general. So this information that is related to performance is completely meaningless to gauge any sort of skill or performance on this particular task. So again, as I stated earlier, we do think that this is an externally valid approach, as in many cases, there is no high quality or accurate information about individual performance. And the last two lines are constant. This is just to populate this table and kind of reduce social desirability bias. Like we can't just say here's the race, here's the opportunity, because it's very clear then what it is that we are manipulating. Okay. Any questions about what we tell workers? None. Okay. So let me move on to the actual experimental manipulations. I should say that after seeing the table, they do the second set of comprehension check questions just to make sure that they understood the table, and then they proceed to the decision-making page. But before I show you any expectations or hypotheses, here are the experimental conditions. We have 8 of them. And as I said, they differ in 2 regards. One is how we are trying to manipulate these opportunity beliefs, and the second has to do with race. So in the rigged condition, we have these 2 race manipulations. In the random condition, we have these 2 race manipulations. And in this particular case, the 2 workers that were assigned to 2 groups actually receive an equal amount, so 5 challenging and 5 easy tasks. So it just so happens they are randomly assigned, and this is what they are facing. The rigged condition is the one where we introduce inequality between workers by providing some with the opportunity to work hard, challenge themselves, but also contribute more to their team. So they can distinguish themselves and also earn more for their team. Worker A in the group receives 8 challenging and 2 easy tasks. Worker B does the flip side of this. So they have 8 easy and 2 challenging tasks on average. And in this condition, we have 3 different race manipulations because clearly it matters who is working on more of the challenging tasks. So the choice condition is exactly the same as the rigged condition, except that workers were allowed to choose their group. So before they went into the situation where they did the tasks themselves, the tasks were described to them and they could choose, do you want to do more challenging tasks and less easy tasks, or do you want to do more easy tasks and less challenging tasks? This is how the groups were formed. Okay, so this is the experiment. And now I'd like to be a little bit more specific about, like, what are the actual research questions that we would like to address within the scope of the experiment against the theoretical backdrop that I talked about. So first, like, how do opportunity beliefs, which we intend to treat by putting these individuals in the different conditions, influence the level of inequality between workers in the bonuses that they receive? That's our first question. And this is a very simple question that aims to bring the literature on policy support on redistribution in conversation with organizational scholarship. So this is something that we believe is missing, and we'd like to study this question. We next explore if liberals and conservatives react differently to these cues about opportunity. As I alluded to this earlier, ideologically liberals and conservatives have different sensitivities to structurally induced inequality, and they do tend to see the world more or less flexible, where individuals are able or unable to overcome these structurally induced inequalities. So we'd like to see some heterogeneity in these reactions, if there is any. Then we are curious if the race of workers influences the level of inequality within opportunity conditions. So this question kind of speaks to that cultural stereotypes literature that I talked about, which is widely researched and very well established. And we will consider this latter question not just in isolation, but specifically how it might interact with opportunity beliefs. So not just like the main effect of race, but how race interacts with these opportunity treatments. And lastly, which is like multi-way interaction, we are curious whether ideologically liberals and conservatives differ in their interactions, as in what is the relationship between the race and opportunity clues for liberals and conservatives, and whether or not these relationships are similar and different across these two groups. So in order to make sense of the data that I'm going to show and the analysis, it's quite important to precisely define inequality in the context of this experiment. If you look at pretty much any inequality measure, the Gini coefficient pops into your mind, or some version of variation. And both of these are always non-negative. Like these are the kinds of numbers that pop up. But here we consider the difference between compensation in the compensation between workers A and worker B, because the direction of this difference is actually meaningful. So from now on, when I say inequality, I mean this specific thing, like how much worker A is working minus how is earning minus how much worker B is earning. Okay, so now I think we can develop some specific expectations that I formulate in the following hypotheses. These three, I think, are kind of straightforward. They follow from the literature. They don't require any sort of mental gymnastics, so I will quickly walk you through. The first hypothesis states that participants would react to unequal opportunity as it is associated with higher levels of effort. And they would have a reaction even when these opportunities are structurally determined compared to when they are random. So again, the random condition, randomly people are getting 5 easy, 5 challenging tasks. In the rigged condition, how much effort was required to do these tasks was different. Although the evaluators don't know whether those efforts were real inputs, at least the opportunity was there for some people to do higher effort work. So we believe that there will be some more inequality in the rigged condition induced compared to the random condition. Okay, so far so good. Then we also expect that the more participants believe that opportunities are agentically produced, so they are based on choice, the more inequality they would feel comfortable with. So compared to when inequalities are structurally determined. So this hypothesis compares the rigged condition with the choice condition, and we simply believe that there will be more inequality in the choice condition compared to the rigged condition. And finally, we anticipate that conservatives would induce more inequality compared to liberals, regardless of the experimental condition. This we anticipate because of their beliefs in how outcomes are produced more generally. So that's kind of our baseline expectation when it comes to political ideology. Okay. So now let me turn to the main effect of race in shaping inequality. So to anticipate this effect, I had you consider the literature on cultural stereotypes. And I made the case that short of additional information, Black people may be seen as less competent, less skilled, and potentially less hardworking. Instead of stating separate hypotheses for all of the different configurations, I'd like to summarize this. And if these stereotypes are held, what they might do to inequality. So let me walk you through one experimental condition to elucidate this, and then it will translate to the others. So let's consider the rigged condition and compare inequality when the Black worker works on more challenging tasks to when both workers are white. So in this scenario, the Black worker may be compensated less compared to the situation when they were white, as they could be thought of as less skilled or less competent or less hardworking, which decreases the inequality as the gap between the Black worker and the teammate. So this gap might be smaller, so inequality would decrease in this case, compared to the scenario when both workers are white. So these stereotypes could operate in the random condition as well, should opportunities favor white workers, but we believe that it's really like specific to the rigged. It will be really specific to the rigged and choice conditions. Any questions on this one? Okay. Okay. So now let me make a case for the interaction effect between race and opportunity beliefs when opportunities are structurally determined. So first, I'm going to talk about the rigged condition. And in this case, we anticipate that placing participants in the rigged condition will heighten their sensitivity to structural determinants of inequality, which are clearly racialized in the context of the US. So this is why we think that there might be an interaction here. So when participants are primed this way, we believe that inequalities would decrease when opportunities favor whites and increase when they favor Blacks. So this is, again, a hypothesis specific to the rigged condition, and it works like this. When a Black worker is deprived of opportunities due to a structural reason, they will be compensated more compared to a white worker, as this triggers sensitivities for structural inequalities more broadly. So that's the idea behind the interaction. On the flip side, when a Black worker is advantaged in a structurally determined setting, they might be compensated even more compared to the white counterpart in a similar situation. So this would push inequality in the other direction. So we believe this consideration is novel to the organization's literature, but is quite generative in trying to understand contemporary discussions of race in hiring, promotion, advancement more broadly, that is increasingly taking into account the context within which individuals perform. So we would like to highlight this interaction of context in race in the workplace in this way. So let me move on to how we anticipate this shaking out in the random and choice conditions, like about this interaction, where we essentially don't expect such an interaction effect. So I'd like to highlight, this is the Achilles heel of today's presentation. And it also highlights that this is work in progress. This is a hypothesis that states the null, and it really responds to H3A, And this shift, where this shift is described, in order to test this properly, we would need to do some Bayesian statistics and some wizardry, which I'm not going to be presenting today. So just to be cognizant, we are stating the null, we would need to have some different methods compared to rejecting or not rejecting the null in this case, just like setting it aside. So finally, we hypothesize that we should see stronger effects for liberals compared to conservatives for H3A. So when these structurally induced inequalities are present, we believe that liberals would be more reacting to them compared to conservatives. Okay, let's talk some data. So we fielded this experiment late August, early September last year, and we fielded this on mTurk. The reason why we chose this platform, because we had access to the services of Cloud Research, which you might be familiar with. This is a service that can pre-select respondents for you on the basis of a variety of demographic characteristics. Political ideology, liberal conservative divide is one of them. So it was quite important for us to be able to do this pre-selection. And we were also able to select workers with the characteristics that were specified in the tables. So I don't think that I have mentioned this, and now I am going to. The workers, worker A and worker B, were actually real people. So we ran 2 experiments. In the first experiment, we actually recruited mTurk workers that fit that demographic profile. They did the tasks, they were compensated in teams, and they left. Today, I'm only talking about the data collection that is the second experiment when our participants are deciding about the bonuses. And we choose to do so to avoid deception. So again, in experimental research, especially among economists, deception is a definite no-go. So we worked very hard to achieve a situation where these teams really existed, they were compensated, they got the bonuses that our participants determined. So we had almost 2,200 participants in this experiment, so it's a relatively large sample. And based on the pilot data we recruited 75 liberals and conservatives in each of the 2 random conditions, giving us 300 people there. And we recruited twice as many in every other condition. So in the rigged and choice conditions, as I said, there were 3 race treatments. So these numbers were based on power calculations, which make us believe that we are well positioned to detect moderately sized effects, but not small effects. Happy to return to this in the Q&A. With a larger budget, of course, it would be much better if we had a larger sample, but do mind that this was a relatively costly experiment because people spent over 20 minutes reading the instructions, doing the comprehension checks, responding to a whole bunch of background information, and they were compensated $5 a piece. And this clearly doesn't include all of the fees that we paid to Cloud Research to be able to pre-select these participants. So we end up with 1,089 conservatives, 1,075 liberals. It's important that not all of them identified as their Cloud Research classifications. So we only have about 85% conservatives with the same self-reported ideology as their classifications. And this is because toward the end of the fielding, we needed to start selecting Republicans instead of conservatives. We kind of ran out of conservatives and our data collection was very slow. And a lot of Republicans do identify as moderates. So in our conservative sample, we do have some moderates. We will address this point with robustness analysis later on. Okay. So in terms of the race filter, we had 96% of our participants who do identify as white and about 5% of all people who also identify as another race. These are mostly Hispanics. And I haven't emphasized this before, but recruiting white respondents was incredibly crucial for us. Going back to like trying to limit our inquiry to how people react to these race cues and how people react to differences in opportunity, we wanted to rule out additional intergroup dynamics. So every evaluator is white. If we had infinite budget, it would be really cool to repeat the experiment with Black evaluators as well to see how those results shake out. But we tried to fix as much as possible in this particular context. Okay, so this is how the sample looks like. Here you see the shares of the total broken out by ideology. And they are compared to the cooperative election study 2020 sample. So this is the second and fourth column, which the cooperative election study takes place every other year. It's a large data collection, and it's a probability weighted sample. So we are able to compare white liberals to our sample and white conservatives to our sample, and these are the differences. Our sample is younger, more educated compared to the general population. This is very normal. It's an online sample, so these are the characteristics. And this table also kind of highlights the differences between our liberal sample and the conservative sample. So the liberal sample is more women compared to the conservative sample. It's younger compared to the conservative sample, and it's also a little bit more educated. So these are the differences. Again, this is something that we can address later on. So the rest of the talk is going to be about this table, these numbers. And what you see here is purely descriptive. So these are the measures of inequality in the different experimental conditions by political ideology. This is simply calculating these means. There is no statistical analysis here, no comparisons. But they give us some hope/face validity to all of what we are doing. So in the random condition, you see these numbers hover around 0. So this is a situation where effort is equal. People are randomly assigned to these groups. There is no pre-selection. They're kind of doing the same work. People are getting paid equally. And maybe there is some indication that you see in the rigged condition, we do see some level of inequality being induced. So again, this is on a scale of 100. So this is how you should be thinking about it. So on a scale of 100, we do see this amount of inequality. And then in the choice condition, there seems to be some more inequality compared to rigged. So this is just face validity. So what I will show you next is going to be a set of models where we will start from simple and proceed to more complicated. As a first pass, we will include main effects for ideology, main effects for economic opportunity, and their interaction. So this is going to be the first set of models. Then the race conditions are aggregated. Then we will break these out by race. So this will have main effect for ideology, main effect for economic opportunity, main effect for race treatment, and the interaction of all of these things. So we will proceed step by step. And confidence intervals are random draws from the multivariate normal distribution with means from the regression coefficients and the variance covariance structure from the regression models that we estimate. Okay, so let's delve into this. First, I start by showing that in the random condition, inequality, in fact, is not different from 0. So not just, it looks like 0, it's not different from 0. But in the rigged condition, we do see that this is the case. So there is true inequality induced in the rigged condition. And also in the choice condition. And when we compare inequality between the rigged condition and the choice condition, this is what we're seeing on the right-hand side, we do see differences amongst conservatives, but we don't see differences amongst liberals. Oh, there is a question. 10 minutes left. Okay. I don't know when did I get this information, maybe a minute ago, and I won't need more than 10 minutes. Okay. So if you remember back, I talked about H1A, H1B, which really talked about these main effects. These are supported. H1C, however, is supported only amongst conservatives and not liberals, and this is a point that I'm going to be returning to. Okay. Cool. So now proceeding to more complicated. So in order for us to test H1C, we need to look at this more complex model where we disaggregate the race conditions. And here, again, you see conditional expectations, and let's start by focusing on the left-hand side of the screen and ignore the right-hand side for a moment. So we see that in the random condition, both conservatives and liberals hover around zero inequality rate, regardless of the race condition, which we anchor on. So moving to the rigged condition, we see some considerable variance in inequality by race among liberals, but not so much among conservatives. So now moving to the choice condition, there is maybe still some variation among liberals, but less so, and no variation among conservatives. So these relate to H2 and H3A through C that we talked about. So now let's talk a little bit about this other side, which compares conservatives to liberals within opportunity and race condition. No differences in the random condition, but systematic differences in the rigged and choice conditions. And in 2 out of 3 cases, these differences are in the anticipated direction. So in order to figure out what might be happening in the rest of the conditions, we ought to look deeper. As I previously highlighted, we should take a look what is happening within each ideological group and opportunity belief manipulation by race. So what we are trying to figure out is what's happening over here, because these results show that in 2 out of the 3 conditions in rigged and 2 out of 3 conditions in choice, conservatives really do induce more inequality compared to liberals, and this does not appear to be the case in the other condition, and we are wondering why. Okay, so this is what we do here. Now, these are interaction effects. So mind, this is not inequality anymore. This is differences in inequality. And in each case, we are comparing the white-white condition to the white-black condition, the white-white condition to the white-black condition, white-white to black-white, etc. Okay, so we moved from inequality to differences in inequality. And now we talk about interactions. So in each case, as I said, this figure is looking at the difference in inequality. White-white is always the baseline. And we do this within political ideology as well as opportunity condition. So we might recall that we anticipated less inequality in the white-black compared to the white-white condition. That is, when a Black worker is doing less challenging tasks, while more inequality in the Black-white compared to the white-white condition when the Black worker is doing more challenging tasks. So in terms of inequality differences, we first anticipate a positive effect and then anticipate a negative effect. So while the first effect, like this guy, points to the direction that we thought this would go, it's not statistically significant, but we do see a statistically significant difference here. But we don't see these effects in the choice condition. Again, it may be that the effect is there, but it's very small, so we can't identify this. We are not powered for this, but we clearly see this effect in the rigged condition, not in the choice condition. And now it kind of becomes a little bit clearer why we are seeing this effect, this difference not going in the desired direction when we are comparing liberals to conservatives. And that's because liberals amongst themselves within the rigged condition do react to the race cues differently when they are in a situation when inequalities are structurally induced. Okay. So far, so good. since I don't have much time, I'm just showing a slew of robustness checks that we had done. We dropped inattentive participants. So these are people who did not answer comprehension check questions correctly on their first or second attempt. And you see a low number here, but that's really about the table. It took people some time until they got all of the numbers and what they meant in the table. We also dropped participants who believed the study was about racial bias. So after participants answered all of the like experimental related questions and follow-up questions, but before we collected opinions about race and redistribution, etc., we asked them what they thought that the goal of the study was. So if people gave an indication that this was about racial bias, we took them out of the sample. It's what about 10% of our sample. We redid the analysis. We also dropped participants who did not believe that workers A and B were real. Again, a very high number, 42%. So this is a function of the online platform and MTurkers being accustomed to being deceived. So no matter how hard we worked, recruiting the people and ensuring at every screen that these are real people, please do pay attention to your decisions. 42% did not believe that these were real people. We also dropped participants whose race or ideology did not match their cloud research classifications. It was the total, of the total 12% of the sample. We repeated everything, including demographic controls. So these are race, gender, age, employment status, stuff that we collected about them, and the results do hold. We also created weights on the basis of the cooperative election study. So we have the weights, we haven't run the robustness checks. This would just make sure that our sample looks the same way as a representative sample. And one thing that we really want to do, which we haven't done yet, but we like to match liberals to conservatives on the basis of education, gender, region, and age. Because as I said, liberals and conservatives are different people. So if there are some higher level interaction effects that we are unable to control for, this strategy would address those problems. Okay, so what does this all mean? Because I think that it's easy to kind of get lost in okay, but wait a minute, is that an interaction or a main effect? So let me try and summarize at a high level what I think we have found. So at a first pass, people are sensitive to opportunity beliefs when assigning compensation. And this is really important. And this we believe is highly missing in organizational scholarship. Opportunity beliefs seem to also interact with race among liberals, but not among conservatives when opportunities are structurally determined. So this is, I don't think it's news, but it's really nice to actually see an empirical representation of this. And it's also nice to see that this interaction is really pronounced in the Richt condition, where this structurally induced inequality prevails, and is not there, or maybe there, who knows, small effect in the choice condition. So it's really specific to these structural inequalities. Maybe a takeaway is that conservatives just see choice, regardless of what kind of condition we are putting them in. So maybe that could be an interpretation. We have only begun to explore the perceptions that drive inequality. So we asked follow-up questions about how decision makers perceive these workers, about their skill, their competence, their need. So we have a slew of questions there. And what seems to be emerging that participants' beliefs about the neediness of workers matters in shaping inequality, and in particular among those who believe that the world is not just. So again, this is mostly liberal people. We have the just worth scale that we measure. So we believe that this might be a clue behind the mechanisms why this interaction obtains in this like structurally determined condition. So these are beyond preliminaries. This is why I wasn't showing them, but I wanted you to know about this direction, like where we could take our data. So with this, I'd like to thank you for your patience and your time, and I am very much looking forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Kinga. It was an excellent talk, a very clear and a very straightforward summary of this experiment. Very interesting experiment. So I will stop the recording now. So just to facilitate the discussion,